And I wanted to add that queer AF, which could stand for all kinds of things, the initials AF, is a theme that will be continuing on into this year. So we're doing a kind of a, what do you say, reset, what do they say, like reboot? We're rebooting Alphabet Sangha with the new year, and teachers will be bringing their own themes each week, and with an overarching theme of queer AF. So be queer as fabulous, queer as fantastic, queer as fungus, queer as, help me out here, Melvin.
Fantabulous. Yes. Yes.
I think of fungus as very queer, so
Sure.
and totally gender queer.
Sure, for sure.
Queer
Yes.
Afrofuturism, yes.
All right.
I love
Okay. Queer's future. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And tonight, Melvin and I are going to be having a conversation about this little book that we were both inspired by, We Will Not Cancel Us, by Adrienne Marie Brown. Yes. We both have our little book. And so, and particularly looking at the ways in queer and trans community that the fear of canceling can really impact our communities, as well as looking at ways that we can really be accountable and have good boundaries and good be responsible to one another in communities. So that's our topic for tonight. And we'll be kind of doing this conversation style. So I think I just wanted to say like a little bit about this topic and why I was really interested in bringing it to, oh, thank you, Robert, for putting the link in. Perfect. I've been really interested in restorative and transformative justice, and as well as, you know, has been so much in the conversation this year talking about abolishing the police, defunding the police, ending this, the prison industrial system and our carceral system. So it's something that I've been really deeply like investigating and learning practices around, is just how do we, you know, what do we do when harm arises without going to the police, and how can we be working outside of those systems? And I think one of the things for me that it's really brought up is sort of like, how do I hold that in my own myself? How do I notice, even in my relationship to myself or in communities, those times when that desire to punish or imprison or that punitive kind of impulse arises? So I really loved that Adrienne Marie Brown, who's someone who I already just adore, her book Emergent Strategy was really transformative for me, as well as her book Pleasure Activism. So I'm pretty much like, yeah, whatever Adrienne is putting out, I'm gonna be reading it. Yeah, so I just really appreciated that she brought this out. We Will Not Cancel Us, and Other Dreams of Transformative Justice. Melvin, anything you would add into that?
Yeah, not really. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, maybe I'll start out with a question for you. What was something that really resonated for you in reading this book?
Yeah, you know, in your intro, so I have it here, and we're just gonna dive in. So Adrienne Marie Brown defines terms like abuse and harm and conflict and critique and contradiction, and my understanding is that she's saying that we get into a lot of just confusion around not understanding the difference. So I just want to read two of the definitions, one for abuse and the other one for harm that you give this. And before as I was reading this, and I think as a survivor of many different types of abuse, that even the word abuse to me can be very activating. And so I say this with the caveat because it's a very succinct term, but I say this with the caveat that so much of the perpetration of trauma, of abuse, is that we're not believed for what we went through or are going through. And then the other part, that the practice of meditation and the Buddha Dharma in general is so helpful, is to see how we internalize that perpetration and how we abuse ourselves. And then obviously, like, we're practicing to reduce the abuse that we might create in the world. And there's another book, some of you may have read it, Sarah Schulman, Conflict is Not Abuse. And that goes into a very nuanced discussion of it's a whole book about it. But Adrienne Maree Brown describes abuse as behaviors, so physical, emotional, economic, sexual, and many more, intended to gain, exert, and maintain power over. Yeah, so power over another person or in a group. And so when abuse is present, so professional support, space, and as Rene mentioned, boundaries are needed. And sometimes I think of boundaries are really important. Sometimes I think of limits as softer. And so limits I connect to harm. And so harm, and in the Buddhist sense, is a dukkha. And dukkha is a whole spectrum of unsatisfactoriness. But harm, as Adrienne Maree Brown describes it, the suffering, loss, pain, and impact that can occur both in conflict and in instances of abuse, as well as in misunderstandings steeped in difference of life experience, opinion, or needs. Harm is what needs healing. Working with individual healers, therapists, and in community, this is what we're doing right now. So working with individual healers, therapists, and in community to understand where the hurt is and what it would look like not to be ruled, not to be controlled, ruled by it. And that's really helped me just to kind of, because when the abuse and the trauma gets reactivated, I feel powerless. But to have a kind of distinction of like, okay, like this is a spectrum of dukkha, and where can I metabolize, or where is there a possibility for transformation? And to be clear, with abuse, as Adrienne Maree Brown said, it's like space and boundaries and are definitely needed to be away from say an abuser or abusive system. And yeah, so that was really helpful to me. Shall I ask you a question now, Rene? Yeah, so I don't know what landed for you, like what else, like, or we're going deeper. Where has cancel culture been present in your communities? Like, yeah, do you want to go there?
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks. That's a great question. For me, one of the places it has shown up has been in trans community. And so I've just felt like I've had a couple of painful experiences around either, people getting kind of cast out of community, or feeling afraid that I would get cast out of community if I made a mistake. And, I'm just thinking of like a particular instance where I actually, confronted someone who I felt was a white person who was causing harm to a person of color within trans community. And actually that person just left. It was like they canceled themselves. You know, there was never even a conversation. It was just like, you know, this is intolerable. And the person just removed themselves. And that also felt really like punitive, almost like they were preemptively punishing themselves even before the community did it. And I think there's been other instances where I felt like they're just, it's felt like there's been such a high expectation that when we come together, we're going to be safe together because we're all trans. And then kind of the opposite happens, which is that we bump up against each other, cause impacts, make mistakes, and that sometimes gets experienced as harm when, you know, it's maybe more complex than that, especially in a group where everyone is coming from a marginalized, oppressed experience, though within that, people have different degrees of power. And so it was very, very complex. And I think one of the things that really resonated for me is just coming to community with a sort of a sense of shared responsibility for co-creating our conditions of being safe enough to be together. And knowing that we all come with our nervous systems that might have their own respective triggers, and taking some responsibility for ourselves. Like, I know what I need, what I might need to request, or what boundaries I might need to state to feel safer in this community, and taking some responsibility for kind of being part of creating that, as opposed to like expecting maybe the leaders or people who have taken leadership positions to be the ones who are creating safety for everyone. My experience is that that's just not realistic. But if instead we can kind of create a culture where where we can talk about mistakes, where we can talk about impacts, we can name tensions as they arise, state boundaries, make requests, that starts to be might not be a safe space. It's still a place where impacts are going to happen, but it's one where we can navigate them together and continue to build relationship. And just being part of, there's a group within East Bay Meditation Center called Restorative Practices for Dharma Practitioners, Sangha, that I'm a part of. And one of the things that we say in there, and I don't know who said this, but the thing that we say is that the conflict is the spirit of the relationship asking itself to deepen. That those times when we get into conflict are actually these times when we have an opportunity to deepen with each other. And I've really experienced that to be true over and over again.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a question. I think of Larry, often think of Larry saying, how do we break together and not break apart? Which has been like also a way for me of describing beloved community, or that's what I think of when I think of beloved community. So I'm curious, like, what would it be like to be in communities where we're committed to like deepen in conflict, be in discomfort together, rather than moving to cancel each other? So kind of curious, Melvin, if you have kind of a vision around that or experience around that.
Yeah. That's deep. You know, let's see. I'm gonna be just totally transparent, Rene, about like when we were planning the calendar for Alphabet Sangha, you know, and planning, we had a couple meetings, right, and to plan tonight, and like that we got into conflict, and
it's true,
right, and that we can laugh about it now. That means we worked through it, but we brought it up, and I'm just thinking how important it is to have like this commitment to this practice, and that even though we've known each other for 12 years, that trust is like an ongoing project. And that's where, and like as you were talking about, like safe enough or sometimes like brave enough spaces, but that like as you were talking, I remembered like moving to the Bay Area and thinking that I would be totally safe and in the rainbow family, and that people would take, and that wisdom has taught me, and wisdom as healing the pain of like going outside of myself to look for that safety when so much of it is generated in through my experience, and through, like you're saying, Renee, like conflict, like that we were able to talk about what came up, and that like I already trust you a lot, and that it like you said, the way I like saying that conflict is something new wanting to happen, and to distinguish, of course, from abuse, and abuse not being acceptable, yet that it's a reality. It's like a part. And one thing out of this We Will Not Cancel This book is that Adrienne Marie Brown, when you said vision, and I giggled because Adrienne Marie Brown says like that as a species, it's like it's so like advanced for us to even get to, and she lays out like 3 layers of it, but that, and I think at EBMC we're doing that we are like committed to, I love the term transformative justice. It's not about erasing or correcting, but it's like using dukkha, because we can't get rid of it, to deepen our wisdom and our compassion, the 2 wings of the bird of the Dharma, and so I kind of, in terms of vision, like who knows, that's very Buddhist, like don't know mind, but also like that so much faith in that we have the tools through this practice, through this particular community of EBMC, to work through stuff. And so I don't know if did I answer your question, but yeah.
Yes, and I love that you brought up that it's funny, I forgot that we had gotten into, but now I remember I got a little irritated with you.
Oh, it's, yeah.
And then I had to really own it.
And I had to freeze.
It was actually beautiful. It was really like this beautiful moment.
Yeah.
I so appreciated that conversation.
Yeah, and we were over the phone. I saw you couldn't see me, but I was frozen, and because I was like, conflict, oh no. And so just to remind everyone, like, or maybe for the first time you might hear this, but like that fight, flight, freeze, appease, they've added, those are very intelligent responses, and they're sometimes overdeveloped and really deep grooves, and the practice helps us. So I was able, it took me a little bit, but then I was like, ouch, something. And then Rene has a deep enough practice where he was able to be like, oh, and hold his stuff, and using I statements, and then I'm like, oh, well, this brought up this, and for me, and so yeah, and I said it was exhausting. I felt like this vulnerability backlash. I felt so bad. I'm like, why did I say? But it is. It's exhausting. Yet, the more we practice it, the easier. It, I don't know about easier. The intensity is always there, but the duration, that exhaustion gets shorter and shorter. It's like, okay, like, yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think this piece around trust is just like really important. And, we were able to navigate this moment of conflict, some because of the trust that's in our relationship, and then this shared practice and some shared language. And yeah, just really seeing like what are some of those qualities that allowed us to just stick in it, and then feel that little bit of deepening that comes from, at least I felt that, the deepening that came from like, I got to own my stuff and see that you weren't gonna abandon me because I had gotten kind of short. in our conversation. And yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
I want to have a chance for folks to also have a little bit of conversation. So I feel like we're just beginning the conversation, but nonetheless, is it okay, Melvin, if we go to some quick breakout groups?
Yeah, and as you were
Wonderful.
just one last point around, like, yeah, so if you can start to yeah, that that it was also held not just in the two of us, which like duplicates some parental and, like you said, the abandonment stuff, but that it's like held within the Sangha too, that because we've been coming back to EBMC and making a spiritual home through our Sangha and the refuge groups, that it wasn't just you and me, but there was something bigger holding us.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so I just wanted to plug that in too, that yeah, but thanks. Yeah, I hope it's okay that I brought it up.
Yeah, I love that you brought it up. So great.